The words fell heavy in the boardroom. The polished table gleamed under white light, and 12 board members sat frozen in uneasy silence. Damien Core didn't lower his voice. He wanted my humiliation to echo in every corner of that room. "You're nothing but a relic. Taryn, a reminder of a company that's already left you behind." I steadied my breath, though the sting of betrayal pressed hard against my chest. "A relic?" I asked, keeping my tone even. "Tell me, Damien, who kept Ironvale alive during the 2008 crash? Who designed the safeguards that protected our billion-dollar mergers from collapsing? Who built the foundation you now take for granted?" His smirk widened. "And that's exactly why you're finished. You think the past entitles you to the future. But Ironvale is about speed, disruption, boldness. You're an anchor holding back a company that's ready to fly." Not a single board member defended me. Their silence screamed louder than his insult. 25 years of loyalty, erased in a single performance staged for power. Let me tell you who I am. My name is Taryn Holt, Senior Systems Strategist at Ironvale Technologies. I joined when we were 12 employees in a rented warehouse, surviving on hope and borrowed furniture. I built what became the Shadow Dependency Network, a system of safeguards, contracts, and redundancies that ensured Ironvale could withstand any crisis. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ironclad. Every deal, every expansion, every contract rested on threads I wove year after year. It meant sacrifice, missed birthdays, lonely hotel rooms, calls home ended because crises demanded my attention. Even when my father died, I was closing contracts in Zurich. I gave Ironvale more than my career. I gave it my life. And Damien? Damien was the opposite of everything I represented. He didn't build Ironvale, he married into it. He had the arrogance of a man who had never known survival, only privilege, while I worked in silence. He demanded applause. Where I protected, he exploited. My very presence reminded him of the truth he hated. His empire stood on foundations he had never earned. Damien leaned back, savoring the moment. Then, with deliberate flair, he held up a folder stamped with my name. "You think this is still up for debate? It's not. Your termination papers were signed yesterday, effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the room. My body froze, breath locked in my throat. Shock and betrayal surged like ice. 25 years, dismissed with a signature I never saw coming. I walked out of the boardroom with my pulse still pounding, Damien's smug voice echoing in my ears. 25 years, discarded like yesterday's report. My heels clicked down the marble corridor, but my thoughts were already elsewhere, carried back through the decades of my life that I had poured into Ironvale. 25 years. It's a lifetime measured not in promotions or plaques, but in the moments I missed. My daughter's 10th birthday, celebrated without me because I was stuck in Singapore finalizing a vendor contract. The lonely dinners in hotel rooms with nothing but cold takeout and flickering television for company. The call from my sister at 2 a.m. telling me Dad was gone, while I sat in an airport lounge, about to board another red-eye flight. Each memory stung, bittersweet in the quiet after the storm. I told myself it was worth it. That sacrifice was the price of building something that lasted. And in some ways, it was. I hadn't just worked at Ironvale, I had wired its skeleton, stitched its arteries, and given it the resilience it wore like armor. Back in those early years, when we were 12 people in a warehouse that smelled of damp plywood. Survival wasn't guaranteed. We couldn't afford to lose a single deal. That's when I began sketching what would become the Shadow Dependency Network. At first, it was nothing more than contingency charts pinned to the wall. What happens if vendor A folds? How to reroute through vendor B? Which contract terms could be leveraged when markets turned against us? Over time, it grew. I coded redundancies into our logistics. I built layers into our contracts. Quiet clauses that ensured Ironvale could pivot when competitors collapsed. I forged partnerships no one else even noticed. Suppliers who trusted me enough to extend credit when the banks wouldn't. By the time we landed our first $100 million deal, the shadow dependency network had become our invisible safety net. I treated it like a living thing. Each crisis fed it, strengthened it. In 2001, when an international bank default threatened to strangle our cash flow, the network rerouted us through alternate financing lines I'd quietly secured. In 2008, when markets worldwide crumbled, my framework kept Ironvale liquid and operational. Employees never saw the gears turning, but they never had to worry about losing their jobs. That's what I gave this company. My child, my creation, my legacy. And Damien never knew. One night, years ago, we faced our closest brush with collapse. A major merger had overextended our debt, and one missed payment would have triggered a domino effect of defaults. Everyone panicked, except me. I had built a hidden contingency, a supplier agreement locked in 5 years earlier, designed to activate only in catastrophic failure. At the last moment, the contract engaged, funds flowed, and Ironvale survived. I remember walking into the office the next morning, watching the executives sigh with relief, shaking Damien's hand as though he had performed a miracle. He accepted their praise with that same smug grin he wore today. Not once did he ask how we had survived. Not once did he care to know the architecture that saved him. It was my system that pulled Ironvale back from the cliff, yet he took the credit. He always did. Thinking about it now, I realized that my shadow network was more than just wires, codes, and contracts. It was a mirror of me, quiet, unnoticed, yet essential. It didn't crave attention. It didn't demand applause. It just worked, tirelessly, in the background, holding everything together, and just like me. It had been invisible until someone tried to erase it. Nostalgia warms me when I remember those long nights sketching out the pieces of the system. But bitterness settles just as quickly, because all Damien saw was his own reflection in the spotlight. He didn't see the scaffolding behind the curtain. He didn't see me. Now he believes firing me is the end of my story. What he doesn't know is that it may very well be the beginning of his unraveling. If arrogance had a face, it would wear Damien Core's smirk. He walked through Ironvale's glass corridors, as though the company were his personal inheritance. Not a machine fueled by decades of sweat and sacrifice from people he barely acknowledged. His authority hadn't been earned. It had been handed to him, sealed by a marriage into the founding family. He hadn't built Ironvale brick by brick or line by line of code. He had simply stepped into the corner office the way one steps into a limousine, expecting the engine to purr without ever lifting the hood. I had worked with visionaries before, people who bled for ideas and bore the scars of their failures. Damien was no visionary. He was an actor playing the role of CEO, his script written in buzzwords and empty promises. And the worst part was, people believed him. Investors swooned at his charm. Magazines ran glossy profiles of his leadership style. But behind closed doors, those of us who knew the truth felt only the weight of his contempt. He dismissed the veterans of Ironvale, the men and women who had weathered every storm since our earliest days. One by one, he forced out the seasoned directors, replacing them with friends who laughed too loud at his jokes and nodded too quickly at his half-formed ideas. Men who had spent their careers negotiating billion-dollar deals were pushed aside for his former fraternity brothers. Women who had built Ironvale's supply chain from scratch were replaced by his golf partners. Competence gave way to loyalty, not loyalty to the company, but loyalty to Damien. I remember sitting in a strategy session as he bragged about injecting fresh blood into leadership, while the board applauded like trained seals. Fresh blood? It was nothing more than cronyism dressed in designer suits. The air in that room felt suffocating, not because of the recycled corporate jargon he spewed, but because every nod of agreement was another nail in the coffin of meritocracy. And yet, What disgusted me most was not his disdain for the old guard, but his theft of ideas. It happened during a board presentation 3 years ago. I had been developing a contingency plan to integrate predictive analytics into the shadow dependency network. My proposal was meticulous. Months of data analysis and coding poured into a solution that could have reduced Ironvale's operational costs by nearly 18%. I shared the draft only with Damien, thinking, perhaps naively, that he would champion it on my behalf. 2 weeks later, I sat in the boardroom, watching him present the same plan slide for slide, word for word, as though it were his own revelation. The colors, the phrasing, even the data models, I recognized every piece. He delivered it with the charisma of a showman, pausing for effect, leaning on the table as though he were sharing genius pulled straight from his head. The board erupted in applause. They called him innovative. They called him forward-thinking. And me? I sat silent, my notes clutched in my hands, the taste of betrayal bitter on my tongue. I could have exposed him, but the truth was that no one would have believed me. Damien had woven his charm too tightly around the board. I was the quiet strategist, the one who worked in shadows. He was the star they wanted to follow. And so he took the credit, wore my work like a crown, and left me sitting in the ashes of my own effort. That day planted a resentment I could never fully bury, not just because he stole from me, but because he mocked what Ironvale used to stand for. We were built on integrity, on the belief that substance mattered more than show. Damien was the opposite. He believed show was substance. And for too long, people let him get away with it. Even now, thinking back, my stomach turns, not because he fooled them, but because he believed he had fooled me too. He thought I didn't see the theft. He thought I would swallow it quietly, just as I had swallowed the lonely nights, the missed birthdays, the sacrifices no one ever counted. But I did see, and I never forgot. The moment Damien's voice faded, 2 security officers stepped into the boardroom. Their polished shoes clicked against the marble floor, as if rehearsed for this performance. The board shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but said nothing, not a single protest, not even a murmur. I rose from my chair, my pulse steady even as humiliation burned beneath my skin. "Escort her out," Damien ordered, as though I were a trespasser, not the architect of the very system that kept his empire standing. The officers didn't grab me. They didn't have to. I walked ahead of them, shoulders squared, but every step felt like a betrayal pressing deeper into my back. The long corridor stretched before me like a stage, lined with glass offices and hushed workstations. Eyes lifted as I passed, screens dimmed, conversations paused, fingers hovered above keyboards. I saw the recognition in their faces. Some looked away quickly, afraid to be caught staring. Others held my gaze for a fleeting second, their expressions tight with pity they didn't dare voice. These were people I had stayed late for, fought budgets for, shielded from layoffs by designing contingency plans that spared their departments. Now, they watched me leave as if I were already a ghost. I said nothing. Silence was my only weapon left, and I clutched it tighter than any argument. In my hand. My employee badge dug into my palm. It was ridiculous, just a piece of plastic with my picture, name, and a barcode. Yet it carried 25 years of nights, missed birthdays, and moments traded away for the promise of loyalty. My grip tightened until the edges bit into my skin. The elevator waited at the end of the hall. My reflection wavered in its golden doors. A woman in her 50s, tired eyes, but still standing straight. If Damien wanted me broken, he would have to settle for something else. Humiliation wasn't collapse. Silence wasn't defeat. The security officers kept their polite distance, but their presence was enough to remind me that I was no longer part of this building, this world I had given my life to. I stepped inside the elevator, the doors closing with a soft hiss. cutting off the stares, the whispers, the weight of 25 years. But just before the door shut, a voice reached me, quiet, hurried, almost afraid to be heard. "Without you, nothing runs." I turned slightly, catching the eye of a young analyst, barely out of college, clutching a stack of reports to his chest, his face flushed with the risk of speaking. Then the doors sealed, and he vanished from view. The words lingered. They pierced the haze of humiliation like a fragile thread of truth. Because he was right. No matter what Damien declared, no matter how the board applauded, the veins of Iron Veil still pulsed with the systems I had built. They couldn't erase that with a signature. They couldn't escort it out with me. The elevator descended, floor by floor, and I loosened my fist at last. The badge was still there, warm against my skin, carrying the weight of years and the bitterness of betrayal. Humiliation had been forced on me in public. But silence. That was mine. And in silence, I carried the certainty Damien could never kill. The empire he claimed as his own was still standing on the network only I understood. He thought he had finished me. He thought this walk of shame was the end of my story. But as the elevator doors opened into the lobby, I knew something Damien Core never would. Endings have a way of looking a lot like beginnings. The silence of my house was louder than the boardroom had ever been. No hum of conversation, no nervous shuffling of papers, just the faint creak of floorboards as I dropped my keys on the table and sank into the familiar stillness. After the spectacle Damien had staged, the quiet should have been comforting. Instead, it wrapped around me like a shroud. I slipped off my shoes and let them fall by the door. My body ached, not from the walk through the building with security at my back, but from the years that now felt wasted. 25 years poured into a company that had turned its face from me as if I had never existed. The kitchen light flickered as I flipped the switch. There, on the counter, sat the half-finished mug of coffee I had abandoned that morning when I still believed it was just another day. My daughter's textbooks were stacked neatly at one end of the table. Her handwriting scrawled across the open pages. She appeared in the doorway, barefoot, her expression a mixture of confusion and anger that cut sharper than Damien's words ever could. "So they just threw you away?" she asked. The question hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened, my chest burning with the weight of every sacrifice that had led me here. Birthdays missed because of urgent calls, bedtime stories replaced with video conferences, her tears on graduation night when I sent flowers instead of being there in person. She had watched me give everything to Iron Veil. Now she was watching me come home, discarded. I opened my mouth, but no words came. How could I explain to her that I had traded time with her for the promise of loyalty that was never real? That the company I had carried for decades had repaid me with public humiliation? I only managed to whisper, "Yes, they did." Her silence was worse than her question. She turned away, and I caught the sheen of unshed tears in her eyes. The pain of it pressed against me, sharp and merciless. I sat at the kitchen table and pulled my old laptop closer. Its edges were worn smooth, the keys faded from use. This wasn't just a machine, it was history. Inside its memory sat the earliest blueprints of the shadow dependency network, the framework I had nurtured and expanded over the years. The invisible nervous system of Iron Veil. As the screen lit up, file names I hadn't touched in years appeared. Each one a reminder of nights spent designing safeguards, coding contingencies, crafting hidden structures that would keep Iron Veil alive when storms came. The Shadow Network wasn't just software. It was my second child, raised quietly alongside my daughter, growing stronger with every crisis it endured. I traced a finger along the lines of code, memories flooding back. I thought of the late nights in Zurich, the endless negotiations in Tokyo, the phone calls that blurred together into a lifetime of sacrifice. My pain sharpened into something steadier, a kind of grim anticipation. Because as I studied the architecture, a realization struck me. Damien had done more than humiliate me. When he signed my termination papers, he had unknowingly activated a clause buried deep within the system. Years ago, I had embedded a failsafe, a mechanism designed to protect Ironvale from rogue authority. If the architect of the network, me, was stripped of power without authorization, the system would recognize it as sabotage, and it would respond. I leaned back, heart pounding. Damien thought he had erased me with a flourish of his pen. In truth, he had pressed his hand against the very switch that would unravel his empire. I closed the laptop slowly, the edges cool beneath my palms. Pain still pulsed through me, pain for the birthdays I missed, the moments I had lost, the daughter who looked at me now with more sorrow than pride. But beneath the pain, a current of anticipation stirred. The dominoes had already been set. Damien had pushed the first one himself, and Ironvale was about to learn that nothing runs without me. The morning after my dismissal, Ironvale's first fracture appeared. It wasn't in a headline or a board report, but in the chaos of a shipping port halfway across the world. A billion-dollar shipment of microprocessors sat idle in stacked containers. Cranes frozen in place, engines idling. The customs clearance system flagged the cargo as incomplete, missing one critical confirmation code. That code had always been mine. By mid-morning, the problem reached Damien's desk. He paced his office with a coffee cup in one hand, barking into his phone. To him. It was an inconvenience, nothing more. "It's a technical hiccup," he snapped, loud enough for his assistants to hear through the door. "We'll override it. Find someone in IT who can push it through. This isn't a crisis, it's a typo." But beneath the bravado, unease had already begun to ripple. Delays at that scale weren't measured in minutes. They bled into millions. Ships rerouted. Warehouses sat empty. Downstream manufacturers pressed for answers. Every hour that passed chipped away at Ironvale's reputation for reliability. Inside the operations floor, managers whispered. They had seen glitches before, but never like this. The system didn't just stall, it locked. No one could bypass it, no matter what code they tried. The clearance field demanded one digital signature, mine. Damien brushed it off during the morning briefing. He assured the board the matter was under control, that the backlog would be cleared by evening. "These things happen," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The media won't even know about it." But I knew better. At my kitchen table, laptop open, I tracked the flow through public logistics dashboards. The containers hadn't moved in 12 hours. I recognized the chain reaction beginning to form. Suppliers couldn't invoice. Contracts couldn't finalize. The veins of Ironvale were beginning to clot. One missed signature at a time. By late afternoon, the unease Damien had tried to hide crept into the boardroom. An email arrived from one of Ironvale's largest investors. Polite on the surface, but sharp underneath. They were requesting the quarterly compliance report, a document required before the release of their next round of funding. Standard procedure. Except this time. The request carried a condition. The report must bear my digital signature. I wasn't there to provide it. When Damien read the email aloud, the boardroom fell into tense silence. For the first time, even his loyal allies shifted in their seats. Uneasy. He chuckled dismissively, trying to wave it away. "Old protocol," he said, tapping the page with a manicured finger. "We'll update their records. They don't need Holt's confirmation anymore." But his voice betrayed him. It cracked, just faintly. At the edges. Because he knew what the others didn't. The investors' systems weren't designed to accept substitutions. Those digital certificates had been negotiated years ago, embedded into Ironvale's DNA. To them, my signature wasn't optional. It was the lock and the key. Without it, the report might as well have been blank. The investors weren't careless, either. They had survived enough betrayals to demand safeguards, and their safeguard was me. Damien's jaw tightened as he scrolled through the rest of the message. His silence louder than any outburst. The investors weren't simply asking for my signature. They were making it clear that without it, funds would be withheld. On the other side of the world, containers sat under a gray sky, cranes unmoving, workers idle. In the boardroom, millions more stalled in frozen accounts. And at my kitchen table, I watched the dominoes shift, unease spreading from me to them, from the warehouse floor to the highest tier of investors. Damien told the board it was nothing, just a small delay, a minor oversight. But I saw his hands tighten into fists as he left the meeting. For all his arrogance, he couldn't ignore the truth. The company he thought he controlled had begun to slip through his fingers. And he had been the one to push the first domino. By the third day, Damien finally had what he wanted, a stage. He stepped up to the podium in front of a row of flashing cameras, his suit crisp, his tie just the right shade of blue to project calm authority. Behind him, the Iron Veil logo gleamed across a wall of screens. To the outside world, he looked like the confident captain steadying his ship through rough seas. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "As you know, Iron Veil experienced a minor delay in one of our international shipments earlier this week. I'm pleased to announce that the issue has been resolved. Our teams acted swiftly, and the matter was contained. Iron Veil remains strong, resilient, and moving forward," the reporter scribbled. Some raised their brows, but none challenged him outright. That was Damien's gift. He could lie with the conviction of a priest delivering a sermon. His arrogance translated as certainty. The more forcefully he denied, the more people believed. Markets react to rumors, not reality. He continued with a charming smile. The reality is that Iron Veil is solid. This company has weathered storms before, and we're stronger than ever. Within hours, his performance did its work. News outlets ran headlines about swift resolution. Investors, starved for reassurance, eased their grip on the panic button. Iron Veil's stock, which had been bleeding points for days, ticked up 3% by the closing bell. In the boardroom, directors exhaled as though a great weight had lifted. Shoulders eased, jokes returned. They clinked glasses of sparkling water while murmuring about Damien's poise under pressure. "Brilliant handling," one said. "Exactly what the markets needed," another added. Relief rolled through the room like a tide. For the moment, at least, the empire felt stable again, and Damien basked in it. He leaned back in his chair at the head of the table, smiling as though he had single-handedly saved the company from collapse. He enjoyed the way the director's eyes settled on him with renewed admiration, as if they had forgotten the unease of the previous days. His arrogance inflated with every nod, every compliment. "I told you," he said, lifting his glass. "A little turbulence, nothing more. The market responds to strength, and strength is exactly what we've shown." He believed his own words. He wanted to believe them. But outside the glow of cameras and champagne relief, the truth told a different story. Deep in Iron Veil's data servers, in the quiet halls of blinking machines and humming fans, the shadow dependency network stirred. What Damien thought was resolved had only splintered. The blocked shipment had been just the first tremor, a visible crack in a much deeper fault line. The system was never designed to be patched with shortcuts or overwritten codes. It obeyed rules embedded years ago, and when one safeguard was ignored, it simply replicated the failure elsewhere. And so, while Damien toasted to his victory, a new error multiplied quietly inside the architecture. A small mismatch in compliance codes, born from his attempt to bypass my digital signature, was copied and spread across the network. By midnight, it had cloned itself into thousands of transactions. Each one froze. Each one waited. Invoices stalled. Transfers locked. Contracts that should have finalized with a keystroke now sat suspended in digital limbo. Employees trying to process orders received the same message. Over and over. Authorization denied. Signature required. Relief filled the boardroom. Arrogance filled Damien's chest. But unease began to creep through the lower floors of the company, where managers refreshed screens and whispered that something wasn't right. By morning, Damien would learn that his victory had lasted less than a day. The empire he claimed to have stabilized was already sinking under the weight of errors too vast to ignore. And the irony was sharp. The man who had mocked me as obsolete had mistaken silence for surrender. But the shadow network never surrendered. It simply waited. The illusion of stability didn't last 24 hours. By dawn, messages flooded Iron Veil's inboxes. In Frankfurt, traders reported that €500 million in payments had frozen mid-transfer. In Tokyo, supply agreements worth hundreds of millions stalled without clearance. In São Paulo, warehouses stacked with Iron Veil's equipment sat untouched. Invoices locked in pending status. It wasn't one region. It was everywhere at once. The shadow dependency network had done exactly what I designed it to do, if legitimacy was compromised. The system refused to move forward. Damien's bravado at the podium had meant nothing to the code I had embedded years ago. Managers scrambled across time zones, trying to push through orders. Their screens filled with the same blunt refusal. Authorization required. Signature invalid. Inside the boardroom, tension built with every incoming alert. Directors who had laughed at Damien's reassurances the day before now sat stiff, their hands clasped too tightly on the polished table. The markets were opening soon in Europe, and Iron Veil's reputation was unraveling before the first bell. "What exactly is happening?" one director demanded. Damien forced a smile. "Regional glitch. Our IT is on it." But his voice lacked the confidence of yesterday. Whispers began in the hallways. Rumors leaked into the press. One financial reporter, citing an anonymous source, broke the story that more than 60% of Iron Veil's global contracts contained one non-negotiable condition. They required digital authorization from me. The headline hit the wires like a thunderclap. Iron Veil's former strategist holds key to frozen contracts. Investors read the words with growing unease. Phones lit up across trading floors. Analysts dug through old filings, cross-checking agreements, finding clause after clause confirming the truth. The shadow dependency network wasn't just important, it was central. And without me, Iron Veil was paralyzed. The board erupted into frantic discussion. Directors pressed Damien for answers, their voices sharper, no longer softened by deference. He raised his hands, trying to control the room. "This is exaggeration. Outdated contracts. We'll override them. Nothing we can't fix." But even as he spoke, his phone buzzed. An aide slipped a printed sheet into his hand. He scanned it quickly, and for the first time, his composure cracked, his jaw tightened, eyes narrowing. The document was an email, and someone, no one knew who, had leaked it. It was addressed to Damien from Iron Veil's legal department, dated weeks earlier. In it, the lawyers explicitly warned him that my digital certificates were still legally binding across the majority of Iron Veil's high-value contracts. Removing me without proper succession planning, the email stated, would invalidate those agreements. Attempting to sign in her place could be considered a breach of contract. It read, and at the bottom, highlighted by whoever had sent it to the press, was a line that sealed everything. Mr. Core does not have the legal authority to override Holt's signature without direct amendment. The email spread through inboxes within hours, forwarded from one department to another, until the press got hold of it. By noon, financial networks were broadcasting the revelation on screens across Wall Street and beyond. Iron Veil's stock began its freefall again. Investors, now convinced they had been misled, dumped shares at a pace not seen since the recession. Billions evaporated in hours. Damien slammed the paper on the table, his voice rising. "This is a misinterpretation, a smear campaign. Don't listen to it." But no one looked convinced. Even his closest allies avoided his eyes. The rising tension wasn't just external, it was spreading inside Ironvale's walls. Employees whispered in break rooms, trading screenshots of the leaked email. Clients called in, demanding explanations. Partners suspended negotiations until the signature issue was resolved. And somewhere in the quiet of my kitchen, I closed my laptop with a heavy breath. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. Not yet. It was the weight of inevitability, because Ironvale's empire wasn't just cracking, it was splintering, piece by piece. Under the pressure of truths Damien thought he could bury, and all it took was one signature he could never forge. By the end of that chaotic week, the boardroom no longer felt like Damien's stage. The tension that had once lived quietly beneath the surface now curled its way into every conversation. Every hushed phone call, every glance exchanged between directors. They had swallowed his reassurances before, but the cracks were widening too quickly to ignore. The leaked email had planted a seed of doubt that no speech could smother. For the first time, suspicion turned inward. Some directors began meeting privately. Without Damien, they gathered in pairs and trios after official sessions, lowering their voices, speaking behind closed doors. What if Damien had known the risks and ignored them? What if the losses mounting by the hour weren't the result of a glitch, but of arrogance? One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table with the glow of my old laptop, I received an unfamiliar call. The voice on the other end was low, cautious. "Ms. Holt, this is confidential. A few of us on the board need to understand what's happening. Is it true the contracts require your authorization?" I closed my eyes, listening to the silent stretch. Part of me wanted to shout the truth, to expose Damien's deceit in full detail, but I knew the cost. Words could be twisted, intent could be reshaped. The more I said, the more ammunition I gave him. So I answered simply, my voice steady. "Systems follow rules. People break them." The silence on the other end deepened. They wanted more, but they knew I would not give it. I heard a sigh, then a quiet. "Thank you." The line went dead. That was enough. Suspicion had taken root, and suspicion grows faster than trust ever can. Within hours. Whispers reached Damien. He stormed into the next meeting, his voice a thunderclap across the boardroom. "Someone is leaking! Someone is undermining this company from within!" His eyes narrowed as he scanned the room, searching for disloyalty. The very people who once laughed at his jokes now shifted in their seats, unable to meet his gaze. He didn't know it yet, but his grip was loosening. Still, arrogance makes desperate men dangerous. Late that night, I received another call. This time, it wasn't a director. It was an attorney, one of the company's own, speaking off the record. "Taryn," he said, his tone grim, "I need to warn you. Damien is preparing to push blame onto you. He intends to argue that these failures are sabotage, that you designed the systems with malicious intent. He's already instructing his lawyers to build a case." My breath caught. For a moment, the kitchen around me blurred. I had given my life to that company. I had built protections to save it, not destroy it. And now the man who inherited everything I created wanted to recast me as the villain. "Why tell me this?" I asked, steadying my voice. "Because," he said, "not everyone believes his story. Some of us know what you built, but you need to be ready. He won't go down quietly." When the call ended, I sat in silence, my hands pressed against the cool surface of the table. Suspicion had shifted again, no longer just around Damien, but now around me. He would try to paint me as the architect of collapse. He would use the very network I built as evidence against me. And yet, even in that moment, I felt a strange calm. Systems follow rules. People break them. I had spoken those words because they were true, and the shadow dependency network was proof of it. It didn't lie. It didn't conspire. It didn't bend to ego or arrogance. It simply did what it was designed to do. And soon, that truth would speak louder than Damien ever could. The war room smelled of burnt coffee and sweat. Rows of monitors lined the walls, each glowing with error messages that no one could clear. Damien stormed in, his tie loosened, his face pale with fury. His voice struck like a hammer. "Fix it! I don't care how! Just fix it!" The IT team froze at their terminals. For 3 days, they had fought against the spreading errors inside the shadow dependency network. And every attempt only made things worse. What had begun as a single stalled shipment had multiplied into thousands of locked transactions. Orders jammed in the system. Invoices bounced back. Entire branches of Ironvale's empire sat paralyzed, bleeding millions by the hour. But Damien's pride wouldn't allow retreat. He prowled the room like a caged predator, slamming his palm against desks, demanding solutions that didn't exist. "Bypass the authorizations," he barked. "Override the damn locks. This is our system, not hers." A senior engineer cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, we've tried. Every override we attempt gets rejected by the integrity protocols. They're self-replicating. The more we push, the faster they multiply." "Then push harder," Damien roared, veins rising in his temples. "I will not be humiliated by code written decades ago." Lines of red text streamed across the monitors, each rejection logged with merciless precision. Authorization invalid. Access denied. The sound of keyboards clattering filled the silence between his outbursts, each keystroke an act of desperation. One by one, subsystems collapsed under the pressure. In Frankfurt, accounts froze entirely. In São Paulo, partner warehouses locked their inventory systems. In Tokyo, the finance wing's ledgers stopped reconciling altogether. What Damien had called a glitch was now a contagion. He slammed his fist on the table so hard a cup spilled across the keys. "Do you understand what this means? If we don't break through, the investors will gut this company. They'll gut me, and I won't let that happen." No one answered. Their eyes stayed glued to the screens, faces pale under the fluorescent lights. They had seen powerful men angry before. But this was different. This was panic wrapped in rage, and it left no room for reason. Finally, a young engineer, barely 25, fresh from graduate school, let out a sob. The sound startled everyone in the room, cutting through the frantic tapping of keys. Tears welled in his eyes as he whispered, "We can't do this. She taught us never to override integrity locks." Damien's head snapped toward him. "What did you say?" The young man's voice shook. "Ms. Holt. She trained us. She said integrity locks exist to protect the system from collapse, that if we ever tried to break them, we'd trigger cascading failures. And she was right. Every time we override, the errors spread. So," his voice cracked, his shoulders trembling, "we're making it worse." The room fell into stunned silence, for a moment. Even Damien had no words. The weight of Taryn's legacy hung heavy in the air. Her training, her rules, her unseen hand guiding the very people he was ordering to dismantle her work. His face darkened, twisting into something feral. "She did this," he spat. "She poisoned this company. And you're telling me you'd rather follow her ghost than your CEO?" No one dared answer, but the silence spoke for them. They had been taught by Taryn, mentored by her discipline, shielded by her foresight. They knew the system obeyed her principles, not Damien's arrogance. He kicked back his chair, pacing like a man hunted. The board's whispers were growing louder. Investors were circling. And now even his own engineers seemed loyal to the woman he had cast aside. His empire was slipping through his fingers, and no outburst could close the cracks. On the monitors, another wave of errors lit up, multiplying like wildfire. The shadow dependency network was holding its line, unbending, unbreakable, and Damien Core, for the first time, looked like a man drowning in a storm he could not command. The market opened like a guillotine. By 9:30 a.m., Ironvale's stock was already in freefall. Investors who had hesitated days earlier no longer waited for explanations. They pulled their capital with brutal efficiency, leaving the company bleeding in red across every ticker. Billion-dollar funds cut ties. Pension managers dumped shares, and small traders scrambled to escape before the collapse consumed them too. On the boardroom floor, the atmosphere shifted from denial to desperation. Directors whispered not about quarterly reports, but about survival. Emergency calls came in from banks demanding collateral Ironvale no longer had. Lines of credit vanished overnight. The empire Damien had paraded as untouchable was dissolving hour by hour. And still, Damien fought to project control. He strode into the war room that morning, voice booming as though sheer volume could bend numbers. "We've stabilized before. We will again. I need each of you to stay calm. This is noise. The market panics. But I don't." For a brief moment. Some believed him. They always did. He had that gift. The ability to spin chaos into confidence. The stock even flickered upward mid-morning, a faint heartbeat on a dying screen. Damien grinned, convinced he had turned the tide. "See? They believe in strength. They believe in me. But confidence is a fragile mask." By noon, the flicker had vanished. Losses doubled. Shares plunged deeper, dragging Ironvale's valuation into ruin. Headlines spread like wildfire. Ironvale on brink. Investors flee. Shadow network locks paralyze global deals. Every metric screamed collapse. Every board member knew the truth. Vindication, for me, didn't feel like triumph. It felt cold. I sat in my kitchen, my old laptop open, watching the numbers spiral downward in real time. The shadow dependency network wasn't revenge. It was rules. It was order asserting itself over arrogance. Damien thought he had power. In reality, he had only ever borrowed it from the systems I built. And now those systems were reclaiming what was theirs. The calls began mid-afternoon. First a director, then another. Their voices trembled with questions, offers, even apologies. I listened in silence. They wanted me to return, to sign, to save what they had ignored until too late. My answer never changed. Silence. And then came the call I had expected all along. Damien. His voice was stripped of its arrogance, jagged with fear. "Taryn, listen to me. We don't have time for grudges. I'll give you whatever you want. Your position back. Control of the board. Hell, your name on the building if that's what it takes. Just, please, fix this." Site. I held the phone, listening to the sound of the man who had humiliated me in front of the board. The man who had stolen my work, dismissed my worth, and called me obsolete. His empire was collapsing around him, and in his panic, he had finally realized what the youngest analyst in the office had whispered days ago. "Without me, nothing runs." He begged again, his voice cracking. "Everything you want. Taryn, everything." And I said nothing. The silence stretched, cold and deliberate. He waited, desperate, filling the quiet with promises he could no longer keep. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't gloat. I let the silence weigh on him like the inevitable truth it carried. Because silence was no longer humiliation. It was power. It was control. And for the first time in 25 years, Damien Core understood who had truly held Ironvale together. The boardroom vote was swift and merciless. Damien Core stood at the head of the long oak table, face flushed, voice straining as he tried to salvage what little authority he had left. He shouted about loyalty, about betrayal, about the vision only he could deliver. But his words rang hollow in the heavy air. Every director around that table had watched the company crumble. had seen contracts freeze, investors vanish, and billions slip away in days. When the vote was called, not a single hand rose in his defense. The gavel struck once, final and cold. Damien's reign was over. He tried to protest, slamming his fist, threatening lawsuits, swearing revenge. But the guards who had once escorted me out now stood at his side, ready to remove him from the empire he had mistaken for his inheritance. This time, no one lowered their eyes. They watched him go, stripped not only of power, but of the illusion that he had ever truly held it. By evening, the news flooded every channel. Headlines scrolled across glowing screens. Ironvale CEO ousted after historic collapse. The silent architect behind Ironvale's survival revealed. They had given me a name I never asked for. The silent architect. Reporters dug through archives, uncovering traces of the shadow dependency network, piecing together how the hidden system had shielded Ironvale for decades. They told the story of a strategist who worked in the shadows, a woman whose quiet diligence had been the backbone of an empire. They called it poetic justice. That silence, once forced on me in humiliation, had become the very force that undid Damien Core. But I wasn't in the boardroom when the vote was cast, nor in the streets when the cameras swarmed. I was at home, the same quiet kitchen where I had first realized the dominoes were falling. I walked to the closet in the back room, one I hadn't opened in years. Inside sat a worn cardboard box, filled with pieces of a life I had once thought belonged to the company. Files, mementos, photographs, and at the bottom, still tucked neatly in its plastic sleeve, was my very first Ironvale employee badge. I pulled it out, the edges rough, the photo faded but familiar. A younger version of me stared back, eyes bright with ambition. With belief in a future I was certain I could help build. I placed the badge on the table, its weight heavier than it should have been. 25 years, I whispered, running my fingers across the plastic. Now, it finally means something. For the first time, those words weren't about sacrifice. They weren't about humiliation or betrayal. They were about triumph. Because my years of work, my sleepless nights, my careful planning had outlasted arrogance, survived theft, and exposed lies. The system I built had held to its principles when people broke theirs. And now, I was free. The world would keep talking. The headlines would fade. Another CEO would rise. But I didn't need their recognition or their praise. My victory wasn't in the articles or the nicknames. It was in the quiet release, in knowing that I had endured, and that justice had finally written itself in a language no one could twist. Triumph doesn't always look like applause. Sometimes, it looks like silence reclaimed. Sometimes, it looks like a woman in her kitchen, staring at an old badge, and realizing she no longer carries its weight. If this story moved you, if you felt Taryn's pain, her silence, and her ultimate triumph, don't let it end here. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let others know what part hit you hardest, and help this story reach more people who need to hear it. Hit the like button if you believe in justice. Share the video with a friend who's been underestimated, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story of resilience and redemption. Because sometimes the quietest voices carry the loudest echoes,